So you're probably not going to believe this, but I really don't have very much to share with you tonight. It's just one simple idea that's been growing. And as I've been working through the Gospels, it just seems to be developing in my own life. And I want to share that one basic idea with you today. Both of our lessons for me are connected to the podcast work that I do. I found a quote from about 100 years ago, recently, just a couple of days ago. I was doing some reading, and I thought it was so interesting. I didn't know much about it, so I just went into that little room and started recording and went after it, and it's coming out tomorrow. But afterwards, I was thinking through, okay, where would I go through Scripture to kind of work through these ideas? And some things came together, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I ultimately want you to become familiar with a simple phrase that I said is about 100 years old. It was a list given at the Westminster Abbey Church in London, England, by a guy named Canon Donaldson 98 years ago. He made a list of sins that he felt like had to do with God's people and also the society around them. He called them at the time 7 cardinal crimes of modern society. And what's unique and interesting about them is they're about sin that we can commit, but they're asking you to think about your conduct in a social sense. They're asking you to see that everything you choose to do and how you choose to live has an effect on the people around you. It has a social aspect to it. And if we thought more about that and we took ownership of that everything we choose to do has this ripple effect, then maybe we could change our conduct and do things differently. A couple of months after he had preached this lesson, there's a guy you might have heard of named Mahatma Gandhi. Anybody? Gandhi last name? He was an attorney in India. He was a peacekeeper. He helped lead the India country out of British rule. And he took these ideas that this guy had written and he posted about them as well, wrote about them, and he called them the 7 social sins. And we'll dig in on that a little bit tonight. Now, if it sounds familiar to you, you probably don't know this list. I will be ridiculously impressed if we get done and you go, oh yeah, everybody knows about this Gandhi list. Like, I'll be impressed. But it may ring some bells for you, and I just want to tell you what those bells might be. This list is not to be confused with 2 lists that are similar in name. One of them is Proverbs chapter 6, the 7 things God hates. Do you remember that list? That list is very important. That list is, and you'll note, very clear and unmistakable. Like all 7 of these things are bad things. There's no room for them to be redeemable. Haughty eyes means I walk around with pride and self-centeredness. A lying tongue, if I kill the innocent, if I devise wickedness, if I run towards evil, if I slander and lie about others and I spread strife, I cannot be in a relationship with God. These were found in the Proverbs. They're taught by Jesus. These are 7 things, the Bible says, that the Lord hates. This is not our list, but it is certainly in some ways akin to this. Now, a few hundred years after this list came out, this one, what's called the 7 deadly sins, which are derived very much from the Proverbs, and maybe you know these. They're not exact matches left to right, but they certainly represent lists that we know. Pride, very similar to haughty eyes. Greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. We know that 6 of those are sins. We don't talk about the 7th one, but ultimately they are all a problem, aren't they? And they're derived from things that the Bible teaches. So if you thought you knew where we were going and you thought of those things, it's similar, but it's not. Now, what I think I'm going to do differently than normal as we get back to the 7 social sins is I'm going to go ahead and tell you the point that I want to make. I want to show you, go to Matthew 15. I want to show you what Jesus said. I want to lead with the words of Jesus. And then we'll take a look at the list on the back half, and it really won't take that long to do. Sin is never, ever, ever self-contained. Even the most secret, private, personal, intimate, hidden sins of your heart cannot be contained. The devil doesn't seek to seed those things because he knows they will make you wrong with God. He knows that whatever he can seed in you will always in some way become social. And that's the idea of social sins. And so what we need to connect are 3 basic ideas. There's your heart, which leads to your choices, and your choices always affect other people. That's the end of the sermon. As I can finish now. Is that okay? That's what I want you to get. what you think and feel and how you process information, what's going on the inside. You can't help it. There's nothing you can do about it. What's going on here will be produced by your choices. You cannot get around that. And every choice you make is a ripple upon the people around you, and you cannot escape that. So if I decide to own my social impact, I leave here tonight and I go, man, my choices matter. The things I do make a real difference. How do I make sure that I take responsibility for that? You will make sure if privately on your own, you're working on your heart. If you skip the heart work, you will not get this right. So working on me is working on you, because as I am, so I do, so I affect you. Jesus talked about it in this way. Go to Matthew 15. This is when he was discussing the scribes and Pharisees and some of their behavior. But in the midst of this whole thing about washing hands, and they were focused on the wrong things, I just want you to see what he says here in verse 16. He says, are you still lacking in understanding also? Matthew 15:16. Do you not know that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated, which had to do with their washing of hands and dirt and stuff? He said, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts. And then he goes, murders, adulteries, fornication, theft, false witness, and slander. Basically like the list I just gave you. And basically that list. He said, do you know how that list happens? That list is very social. When you're slandering people, when you're lying about people, when you're murdering people, when you're committing adultery with people, it's all very social and outward. He said, it turns out though that every single thing that you end up doing, murder, adultery, fornication, they all come out of the heart. That's their source. Now to some of us, that may be very scary information, because you may be like, my heart's not right. My heart is hard. I'm a very bitter person. I carry around a lot of things. So I got to find a way to have all that rottenness hidden in here that nobody sees and go out and be a good person. You can't. You cannot. You can try. That's hypocrisy. That's what the Pharisees did. They had this hard, dark heart, and yet they wanted to produce good fruit, so that they could be good people. And so God could say they're being lights in the world. He said, it's always going to come from here, and you're never going to be able to stop it until it spreads in all directions. So Jesus talks about those very ideas, and it's super akin to what Paul wrote about in Galatians 5. We study Galatians 5 a lot, but go look at that list in Galatians 5. Do you remember that list of the fruit of the Spirit? So far as I can tell, all of these happen where nobody sees them happen. All of these are worked on and developed, and nobody gets to witness it. You work on having a heart that is loved by God and loves others. You work on having a spirit that has joy in it because of Christ, or peace radiating through you because of His goodness. You know the list: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That's all in you. And you might be tempted to say, that's in me, that's nobody's business. What is in you becomes everybody's business. That's my whole point. I'm going to make one point 19 times tonight. What is in you becomes everybody's business. If you have love and joy and peace in you, if you find a good spirit of faithfulness, then guess what? You're going to make choices that tend to lend to faithful things. Now, he makes another list that we don't enjoy as much about what is possible. He said there are these deeds that you can commit. Okay? I want you to notice these deeds. He said you can commit acts of, verse 19, immorality or impurity or sensuality. You can go out and perform idolatry and sorcery. You can go out and be a divisive person, a strife-seeding person, a jealous person, an outburst person. You can cause disputes and distraction. You can cause all the drunkenness. You can go out and do all of this, but we've taught it many, many times. The only way those things happen is when the list beneath it is absent. I would just push it a little further and say if the list beneath it is absent, it is inevitable that those things begin to happen. Because what is here always comes here. People tend to overemphasize and exaggerate their ability to stay quiet about what is within them. My experience is really good people. You know people whose hearts are just pure gold? They're pure kindness, they're pure love. They couldn't hide it if they tried. They don't know how to hide it. It's all over their faces. It's every time I walk in this building and interact with them. It's in fact every interaction that I have with them. It's the way that they live their lives. Like they can't hide a good heart if they tried, and it's affecting people even if they didn't want it to. Isn't that awesome? Guess how that works? Both ways. It always does. It works both ways. And what's interesting about this text is, if you back up a little bit, he's talking about impact on others. That's what this whole Galatians 5 text is about. He ends up saying, hey, you're going to need to work on some stuff right here. You and God need to work on that love and joy and peace and patience. But the point of the text was, verse 13, for you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word. This is Galatians 5:14. Love your neighbor as yourself, but if you bite and devour each other, take care that you're not consumed by one another. But I say walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. He's saying, brethren, listen, you're going to affect your other brethren. We're going to get to this a little bit tonight. You are going to affect the people sitting a pew in front of you and a pew behind you. Your choices are going to affect them. And I don't just mean like your spiritual category choices, like every kind of choice you make, from where you decide to work or what you decide to wear, like everything's going to affect. Are you willing to own the social element of being I almost said Christian. How about this? A human. That's what it's like being a human being. And so what we want to be as Christians is we want to be people who go, I'm going to work on verses 22 and 23. I may do a lot of it privately. I may need personal counseling. It may take a lot of work, but it is that quality in me that's going to keep me from performing the deeds that are above because they affect others. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. Now, let me show you the list, and then we'll sum it up at the end. Very interesting list. 7 social sins by Donaldson and Gandhi both, and they both listed them the same way. I'm going to show you 7. Now, it's a phrase, so I'm going to give you one word for each of the 7, see if I can confuse you. 7 social sins. Politics. You're like, amen. Wait. Wealth, pleasure, knowledge, business, science, and worship. Now, the last one probably threw you for a loop because you thought, if this is a sin list, then worship shouldn't be in it. Here's the point. I've got more words to give you. Each one of these 7 social sins is 3 words apiece, but these are the words that they all start with. And here's what I want you to note about these things. These are a variety of things that you can and will engage in. Some people in this room will be political. You may vote. You may be an advocate for something. You may actually get elected to office. But the point I want you to see in all of them is these are things you do in your life, and they are all social. Without any doubt about it, they're intended by God that when you participate in these things, you will be affecting other people. The first one's obvious. You run for office, you win a place in office, local government, school board, whatever it is, your politics affect the policies of people's lives. But it's true all the way down the list. Wealth is something that many of us pursue. This list is amoral. Do you know what that means? It's not sinful or righteous. It's just stuff you're interested in. Stuff you're going to pursue. I find it interesting that in 1925, when Donaldson listed these 7 things, he said these things are susceptible, these are social things, susceptible to sin in our modern world. I like that word modern. It's all very relative. That was 98 years ago. Guess what's changed? Nothing. These are still things that we pursue, things that matter. Now, what I want you to begin to see, and I'm only going to do a couple of verses in this list, but go to 1 Timothy chapter 6 for a moment. I just want to use this second one to illustrate, 1 Timothy chapter 6, that when you pursue wealth, not calling that a sinful thing to do, but when you pursue money and you want money, God intends you to understand that that is a social endeavor. The Bible repeatedly, the Gospel of Luke, the whole New Testament says, when you get money, you will use that money. You may use that money to give and help and serve. In fact, that's God's intent for that money. Look in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. He said, instruct those who are rich, 1 Timothy 6:17. In this present world, not to be conceited or fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up treasures for yourself in heaven. We get a story in the Gospels where a guy got rich and he didn't want it to be social at all, did he? He got rich and he said, all my barns are full. I wonder what's the social impact of my wealth. He's like, forget that. In fact, you guys remember we've looked at the pronouns in that story. The only pronoun he ever referenced was himself. He didn't see his wealth social at all, so he said, I'm just going to go build myself larger barns so I'll have more. It was social. He was just being greedy. He was socially a problem, and he's going to be judged for that. God's plan is for us to use our wealth socially to help people and share with them and benefit them. All of these are like that. You go, well, my pleasure is just my pleasure. I beg to differ. Your pleasure are the choices you make in life that bring you joy. They're the places that you go and the things that you do and the skills that you develop and the way that you live a fulfilling life. Please tell me you don't believe that's self-contained. Everything you choose to do for pleasure is social. It's social because it's known by others. It's social because others will follow your lead. All of it has to be looked at in that way. Just to put a fine point on it on this left side. Ultimately, all of this affects others. The one that's sort of self-contained is knowledge, but even that, like knowledge is power. Because based on what you know, so you speak. Based on what you know, so you do. Based on what you know, so you build. Like what you know affects the path that you take, and that path affects everybody you know. Like everybody's affected. Business is the same way. You start a business, say, my family and I wanted to start a business. We want to do some commerce work, but that's never self-contained because it affects people that you know and it affects people that you don't know. Science is interesting because I had to think about it a little bit. But he was talking about technology, and we've had a lot of that, haven't we, in 100 years? A lot of technology, a lot of knowledge applied, building things, figuring things out, putting things together. You know for a fact that technology and science has provided things that have helped the entire planet, right? And also scientific developments have nearly destroyed the entire planet. Science is social too, what we learn. And the one I really wanted you to see is worship. I'm not saying these are right or wrong. I would say they all can be applied right or wrong. But the point is, however you choose to apply them, you probably are applying them and they are affecting other people. But worship, go to Hebrews 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Coming out of a pandemic, and now we have an epidemic. We've gone from something that affected this whole world and it affected a lot of people in their view of worship. And now more than ever, we're hearing this idea that worship isn't social. It's private. Worship is between you and God. You can worship at home. You can worship on the ninth hole. You can worship wherever you want because ultimately that is something you do toward God that is just about you and God. That is a big, fat lie. It's never been about that. Yes, it's about worshiping God and honoring God, but God is always, even in the days of Israel, He said worship is social. Worship is about the people that you're with. The Lord's Supper, we're going to study this next week. The Lord's Supper asks you to contemplate the body of Christ. You got to be with the body to contemplate that body. It's something that we do together. In Hebrews 10 verse 23, you know this well. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for He who promises is faithful. And here's what we do when we worship. We consider how to stimulate one another to love and to good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near. Why go to church instead of staying home? Because worship is social. And please understand what I mean by social. I don't mean fun and games and food. I mean it is people interactive. It affects the society around you. That's what I'm talking about. And so we have to kind of own that. Will that change the way people view their worship if they've just been sitting at home making this personal relationship with God? I hope it explodes that idea. Because everything you choose to do matters. But this list proves that it's not just a spiritual thing. It's anything and it's everything and it's all the time. Go to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. Here's what I want you to see and then we'll look at the back half of this. Matthew chapter 5. You remember what Jesus said about being a light. What I want you to see is, look at this list. I mean, where you work, business, what you do for fun, pleasure, how you accumulate and handle your money, wealth, who you vote for, or what policies you promote, politics, and worship. There's practically nothing that you engage in life that somebody else is not going to be affected by. And yet we're told in Matthew chapter 5 that we are lights in this world. He said, verse 14, you are a light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. You don't get to pick where that happens. You don't get to go, this thing I'm doing here is not about other people. This is just about me, and I don't even have to concern myself with the way this, basically you're putting the basket over the light. God would have said that's sin. I don't ever want you to do that. I want that little light of yours, as we sing in the song, I want it shining everywhere that you go, because the truth is you are affecting people wherever you go. If you're shining lights for Christ in any of these categories, you're doing the right thing. If you're covering that light and going, I don't want to be a part of that deal, then you're doing something. It's just that thing becomes wrong. We got some back to school going on this week. Got people going back to work, got a lot of things going on. Just keep in mind that 7 social sins start with 7 social things that are not sin. Okay, so what makes them sin? Quickly go with me to 1 Corinthians 13. I'll give you a hint, and then we'll just go through the list all really quickly at one time. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. What would make these sin? They don't have to be sin. There's not a thing on that list that has to be sin. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, look at the first 3 verses. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, 1 Corinthians 13:1, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, that's a really amazing thing to go do, but do not have love, it profits me nothing. Now those 3 verses make the point that I started to make in the beginning. These are 3 great verses. Like we go out, we do all these great things. We speak in tongues, we were able to prophesy, maybe work miracles, give to the poor. But he said, yes, all that affects people. But trying to do any of that without love for that person in your heart makes all of that mean nothing. What's going on in here matters a lot. Your love, your heart, your humility, your faith matters, because this determines what you do, and everything you do affects others. Now, in this list, you can even do great things. That's what's so sobering about 1 Corinthians 13. You go out and do the most amazing spiritual things. God said, means nothing to me. Because ultimately, it's hypocrisy, and that's going to hurt society, hypocrisy. I want it to be out of love. That's where our list comes together. Let me show it to you briefly. He goes, look, 100 years ago, still stands. Said, you want to be involved in politics? Hey, you know what? That's going to affect a lot of people, but you need to know something. Politics without principles is going to ruin everything. Principles are, that guide in you, that understanding, that belief, or your ability to follow rules. For us, it's rules that God gave us. Like politics can be awesome, but if there's no sense of moral compass within you, then everything you try to do in politics will be bad. He said, wealth's great, but wealth without work ethic is going to turn into greed and selfishness, and you're going to cut corners, and you're going to cheat other people, and the Bible's full of that, so let's not act like that never happens. Like that's all over the book of James, everywhere. Like wealth can be used well, but not if you open me up and said, hey, you're pretty wealthy. Let me look inside of you and see what drove that. If it's laziness or cheating, then all that will be used wrong. I've got to work on my work ethic. Pleasure can be great. Can lead other people to a bunch of really wonderful things, but pleasure without conscience. You know what conscience is? It's that sense of accountability for things that I do with my pleasure and time. It's this sense of empathy for how my choice of pleasure affects other people and their consciences. Pleasure can be awesome, and everybody will see what you do. But pleasure without conscience is sin. Knowledge without character. You can have all the knowledge in the world. This is kind of 1 Corinthians 13, isn't it? You can know things, speak wisely, use big words, make all these amazing decisions. But if what is inside of you is not an honorable disposition and thoughts that are holy, then your knowledge is just going to end up hurting somebody. It's just a matter of time. Business is great, but business without morality, I think most of us have had a little taste of that in our lives. Dealing with companies and leadership and landowners and people who run businesses that they started for themselves, but it turns out we're all kind of affected by your business. The problem is they don't have morality. And so their business ends up hurting all of us. Business can be awesome. Business can provide revenue and sustenance and help for many people, but not without morality. Science without humanity, we talk about bombs and weapons and things that science has built. It's amazing what science can do. Speaking of those kinds of things, I got to visit the National Air Force Museum in Ohio. It was amazing the way things have changed and how quickly technology grew and science and application. There was a lot of good that came out of that, but there were some things that came out of that were super duper dangerous. And I just wonder if maybe things could have gone differently if humanity, you know what humanity is? Humanity means you got to care about the people around you. Humanity means you got to care about the people that you love. Humanity means you got to care about the people that you don't love, or, well, let me rephrase, that don't love you. Humanity means you got to care about somebody who lives half a world away. And then worship. You say, well, worship can't be bad, can it? Worship without sacrifice or a sacrificial spirit is dangerous. Worship without a spirit that falls into the arms of God. If you're not here today out of gratitude for the great God of heaven and you're here for any other reason, that reason will seep into the hearts of the people around you, and that's scary because it's all social. And you know what I mean? It affects the society of people who are with you. The Bible teaches us in Romans 12, not talking about going to church, just talking about being a Christian. The Bible talks to us about worship, about having a worshipful spirit. Like in Galatians 2, like it's no longer I who live, it's just me sort of living your truth in my life. In Romans chapter 12, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. What's my service of worship? Giving my life as a sacrifice to His glory. Bring that to church, and we're going to have a worship service. You bring to church 402 people like who came in the building this morning, all of which have already given their lives to God and love God and live for God and want to praise God, and they gather together in a room. That's going to affect everybody deeply and enduringly. Worship can be awesome, but you take away the sense of self-sacrifice and you come up with some really crummy reasons to worship. Some selfish reasons, some box-checking reasons, some influencing others, but not from a pure heart, the hypocrisy reasons. These are sins. Crucially, here's what I need you to see, built within. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Let's look at the list from the left to right. That's over here. Here's all I'm asking you to think about tonight. I've got the slides in the back. I'd love for you to take a look at this. Ultimately, there's rarely a single thing you engage in or do in your life that God will not say, hey, I've got other people I'm going to put in your circle on this. I'm going to make sure that this affects people. You're never going to be able to self-contain it, whatever you do. As we move a little bit this way, we see that that's not just church stuff. That's not just God's stuff. That's every stuff. That's student, that's employee, that's employer, that's political position, that's stuff you know, stuff you do for fun, and worship. Like every part of my life is susceptible to God's usage, and God's usage is people. It's always people. As I move this way, I see that it turns out what's going on inside of me determines the morality of what happens outside of me. Everything in this list can be fine if it's accompanied by some internal virtue that you have developed in your faith. Now it's going to work out great. If these internal things are weakened, if they don't exist at all, if you're failing on morality or you're failing on conscience or character, but nobody knows about that anyway, and nobody's going to know about that, and it's all self-contained, I'll deal with it later, then you need to kind of just like wake up with me. We just need to wake up. Because those things from the heart of man comes out everything. Everything you do and are. And so we want to work on that in a way that says, you know what? The time I spend in private prayer is really important time. The time I spend in the morning on my bathroom tiles going love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, and then I walk back and kind of like pick one and make that my daily prayer. That's really important time. You don't ever get to see that. You don't ever get to see that happen. But because I tried to do that, I hope you do get to see some things. But you see, this is why you see the things you see, if you see the good things. If you see bad things, it means I've got problems, and I've got to go back and work on them. And so as we go through this, we can look at it that way. You can read it from this way, that way. You can say, look, that private time is really important because as I develop my faith, as I read the Word of God, as I commune with God, as I learn to trust God more, I'm just going to develop some really good things that nobody's ever going to see until they see them. They're going to see them in the way that they get represented, which is a wide variety of things, and then the world can be affected. Got to get away from things like, look, you know, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing right now. That's what I'm doing, but it's not about you. It's just about me. I can think of almost nothing. I've been thinking about it. That fits in the category of, look, this is just about me right now, and I'm not in this to affect everyone else. Or better yet, this is just me and God. It has nothing to do with you. I remember my parents go to church here, and I remember telling them as a teenager, they're like, wow, Kris, I don't like what you're doing, and where you're going, and how you are. And I'm like, Mom, it's not about you. It's not about you. This is just about me right now. I'm working on me. I'm trying to find me. I'm working out me. And she's crying. And I don't know if she's crying, like yelling. She's pretty rough and awesome. But I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I knew I had a lot of moral failures. And I knew it was leaking out a little bit. I mean, everybody knows when it's leaking out a little bit. But I was like, it's not. Why is she so upset about it? This is just about me. Me and God. That was foolishness. And you know when I figured that out? I got 4 kids. And I figured that out. I remember calling her, I think I was 25. I think I had a 3-year-old, and I called her, and I was just like, I'm so sorry. For what? Yeah. For all of it. Everything that little girl does, like, I feel it 10 times as much. I didn't know about that. Well, what's true in that is true in so many things. I'm optimistic, though. I'm optimistic about what can happen. You see, all this stuff where it's not bad, there's nothing wrong with it. It's all great. And if it's accompanied by the good things, principles and work ethic and a good conscience and some solid character, just some good old-fashioned biblical morality and loving people and being willing to sacrifice a few things, all of a sudden I still do all of this and it becomes a virtue. Virtues that honor God and please God. I think that's who we can be. I think that's who we can be. You're going to be somebody. And somebody else is going to become who they become because of who you are. I think that made sense. Had a lot of little words in it. Somebody, and I'm not just talking about your kids, somebody around you is going to become who they become because of who you are. Are you ready for that? Who's ready to go? I own that. Scares me a little. But then I understand that if I build my relationship with God and I work on the things that nobody sees, everybody will see it soon enough. And maybe God can use me as a vessel for virtue. Pour what is good into the lives of others. I'm going to be pouring something into the lives of others. I don't get to choose that. You're doing that. You're pouring something into the lives of others. Wonder if it could be virtue. Wouldn't that be great? I think God has good plans for us. So I just wanted to share this with you. 7 social sins that we can turn into great virtue, but we got to own the inside, the outside, and the effect on everyone else. You ready to be stronger in that? You need some correction in heart? Maybe you want to own a little bit how you've influenced others and you'd like for them to support you and forgive you. We're here to help you and sustain you. Christ is here to save you in that water of baptism if you choose to submit to Him. Come now as we stand and sing.